Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv Wolok. Today, we're keeping it a little bit simple. This video is going to be a little bit different. This is part of those series that I said I was going to start adding, and Vasili and I will start adding. Today is just a game day preview for the first preseason game of the 2023-24 NHL season. The Philadelphia Flyers on Monday, September 25th, as I'm recording this, will be taking on the New Jersey Devils. And what an exciting moment, because this is my favorite time, right? Because there are so many hopes and dreams. There are so many opportunities that will inevitably be crushed periodically as we go through the preseason. But as of right now, the hopes and dreams are still alive. And this is probably some of the most positive time around the NHL where, you know, you kind of look at the youth and what you have at the NHL level. Teams are throwing out kind of half rosters. Games are relatively competitive unless you're Calgary beating Vancouver 10-0 in a preseason game, which I think it's the first time I've ever seen that. But, you know, today we're here to talk about the Flyers. Wanted to go through the lineup today. We'll talk a little bit about the Devils lineup. As of right now, as I record this, they have not really posted their lineup. They're in a doubleheader today. So we're probably going to have a little bit of mix and matching, but I will go through the players most likely available in this game. And one thing I want people to keep in mind as you watch these preseason games, I think most of the people listening to this know this already, but take everything with a grain of salt. Take the veteran performances with a grain of salt. Obviously, certain players are working their way back into the NHL. The veterans that have locked NHL positions, they are not going to be going 100%. It almost never happens. A lot of the younger guys will kind of step up in these times. You'll see younger players who, you know, are on the brink of making the NHL, or maybe they're the best players in the AHL, or maybe they're just top prospects, kind of elevate their game to kind of show what they have. And that's really what these games are about. And that's what makes them exciting, is that it's, you know, the standings don't matter. The statistics don't matter. You're really just looking for individual performances and who can show you what. And, you know, I had some time to be at training camp this weekend finally. And it was really great to see. And, you know, you can see the way Tortorella is really pushing the pace this training camp beyond what I saw last season. And it showed. And it was highly competitive. There, you know, it should still be approached with skepticism. Again, it's training camp. It's preseason. Let's be honest here. Like I was saying before, this is not the real competition. So do not assume that just because a player is doing great during preseason, that's going to translate into the season. I've seen it countless times happen before. Mikhail Vorobiev, if you guys were watching the team around that time, he came in looking like a star player, and you thought for sure this guy is about to hit the next level and is an NHL player. And then when the NHL season started, he just kind of tapered off, and now he is in the KHL permanently. Is, you know, a pretty good player over there, but he never made even a mark here. So don't get your hopes up too much on any of these things. Same way as the rookie games. These things are not a reflection of their NHL futures. Let's just make that clear. But what we are watching today is we're going to see things, and I'll go through the lineup in a minute here, is we're watching the coach's mind at work, right? Pay attention to line combinations, and I'll bring that up as I go through them, why certain decisions are made. And at this point, game one for the Flyers in a preseason game, you're going to see mostly young players, and the veteran players are the ones who are either trying to make their way back into the lineup or they're trying to show that they can play that specific role. I talk about that all the time in the NHL. It's not just about the best players. It's about roles and what your role is for that team. If anybody watches football, that is a heavily role-based game. Heavy, right? They don't play offense and defense. It's not like that. But it still exists in other jobs, right? Even in basketball, you can bring in a defensive specialist to come off the bench, or, you know, to compensate for the fact maybe you're an offensively heavy team. That's kind of the case here. And through these decisions is how you actually mold your playing style. Even if a coach has a strategy, depending on the players available to him, he could potentially mold that strategy. So let's go through the Flyers lineup. Actually, you know what? Let me go through the Devils players first, and then we'll have fun, and we'll go through the Flyers lineup because nobody really cares about who the Devils are playing, let's be honest. It's more maybe fun just to see some of those guys. So the players listed on the potential roster, and we don't have line combinations for these, so I'm just going to go through the forwards, the defense, and the goaltenders. Forwards will be Alexander Holtz, Brian Halanen, Eric Howla, Jasper Bratt, Josh Philman, Michael McLeod, Nico Hischier, Andre Palat, Ryan Schmelzer, Shane Bowers, Timo Meyer, Tice Thompson. And those are the forwards. The defense, Brendan Smith, Cal Foote, Daniil Misyul, tough name, Dougie Hamilton, Kevin Ball, and Santeri Hataka. Those are the defensemen. Combinations will probably be mixed. I imagine you hear the NHL regulars throughout there. They will probably be playing some of the higher roles in the lineup, but expect some of those younger players to be peppered within there. We'll see that with the Flyers lineup as well. And the goalies will be Vitek Vanacek and Eric Kallagren. They will probably, I imagine, have kind of a split role there. I imagine Vanacek might take 2 periods and Kallagren might take the last period. We'll see. Sometimes they do 50-50. Sometimes they do 2 periods and 1 period. So we'll see. I don't have too much information on all those guys besides the NHL guys and some of the top prospects, so I don't want to go through them. Really want to keep this focused on the Flyers. So we'll go through the Flyers lineups. Top line will be Joel Farabee, Sean Couturier, and Bobby Brink. Second line will be Ule Lichel, Morgan Frost, Cam Atkinson. Third line will be Matt Brown, Denver Barkey, Tyson Forrester. And the fourth line will be Tyson Fury, Elliot Denoyer, and Samu Tuamala on the right-hand side there. The defense is where it gets interesting, and I'll go through these in more detail. This is where it gets more interesting. Cam York will be with Sean Walker. Emil Andre will be with Helge Grans. Oliver Bonk, which is awesome to see, will be with Nick Seeler, who's Seeler's playing the right side there. And then goaltender will be Pedersen and then Felix Sandstrom as the 1-2 combination. I believe Pedersen will be playing the first and the second period, and Sandstrom will close with the third. So let's go through the forwards a little bit in detail. So interesting to see that the Flyers went with Farabee, Couturier, and Brink here. I did think it was an opportunity, especially because Tyson Forrester is playing in the lineup, to play Forrester with Couturier. But this is what I talk about roles, right? You look at the fact TK is not playing in this game. Potentially to injury. We'll see. We'll have more updates on that. And we'll go through this stuff on the podcast, and we'll go through the post-game on the podcast as well. This is really just a pre-game preview. Bobby Brink is slotted in there. Again, a guy who I wouldn't say is the same game as TK, but again, an undersized, feisty player with offensive upside. In some ways, he is similar to TK. I don't know if he's ever going to be as explosive as TK or any of that. I don't want to put that on him. But he is a guy with a dynamic skill set, and I think they really want to see something from him. He hasn't shown too much. He didn't show too much in that rookie game. At camp, I did see him make some nice moves. He's definitely got a lot of dynamic skill. This is a guy recovering from an injury, so again, take all of these games with a grain of salt, and he is a guy who I expect to have a much better second half of the year this year in the AHL. I expect him to be in the AHL this year than the first half. But I really like that they're putting him in that top line with Joel Farabee, who we want to see where he is today as well. And I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Could there be some changes throughout this lineup as the game evolves? For sure. And here is an example, right? Like the second line of Ule Lichel, Morgan Frost, and Cam Atkinson. This is interesting because if you really look at the NHL roster, there's a really good chance it's going to be Farabee, Frost, and Atkinson as that second line. But you see with Tippett not being in the lineup, with Lawton not being in the lineup, right? These decisions are kind of made to elevate Farabee to the top line because he is on the depth chart without Tippett sitting there, the top left winger, and a guy who I believe has for sure top six ability, but potential top line ability as well. I have not moved off that. He's younger than Tippett. He's younger than Frost, and he was dealing with an injury as well. So I really like that they're going with the Farabee, Couturier, Brink. Then Ule Lichel, obviously a guy who had a really good AHL, so actually a fantastic AHL season and saw NHL time last year. The fact that he's going to get some real playing time with Frost and Atkinson, that's a great opportunity for him to showcase. Again, I talk about roles, right? Ule Lichel, when he's playing on the fourth line for the Flyers, it's going to be a lot harder for him to showcase his skill set. He's not like a pure offensive dynamo or anything, but he is an offensive player. He's a Swedish player, so he's two-way in a lot of ways. But he's not like a big, strong guy. He's 6'1". He doesn't have huge size or anything like that, but he's got good NHL size, and he's got the ability to do a two-way game with an offensive upside. So putting him with Frost and Atkinson, I think is great. And seeing Frost is in that top six immediately, and going to be heavily relied upon in a game like this, where obviously the Devils have, and I read them out, NHL players playing in this game. So it will be a test for this top 6 core group. And then the fact that they are playing Couturier and Atkinson in that first game, that's exactly what I was pointing to, right? These are two guys who have not touched the ice in a significant amount of time. I think since 2001 for Couturier, 2022 for Cam Atkinson, they got to play. So putting them both out there in the same game, I think is the right move. Get them out there early. Maybe give them off on Wednesday when they have their next game. I'm not entirely sure what they're going to go about that. But I do like the idea of having them touch the ice early. The third line is interesting as well. I love seeing Denver Barkey and Brown on this lineup. Brown is a guy that we already know had really good flashes in that rookie game. He is a more developed player. He's 24 years old. He has an offensive upside. There's a good chance that he's going to play if Forrester, for any reason, which I don't believe, will not play in the NHL to start the year. There's a good chance that Brown might play with Forrester in the AHL. Now, Barkey will not be in the AHL because he was just drafted last year, but this is a guy I'm getting really high on. The more I see him, the more I love. I talked about it in one of the previous episodes. When you are not physically mature, but you have everything else kind of going for you, I get really excited about that because physical maturity comes along differently for a lot of young men. Just because you're 18 doesn't mean you're physically mature because the other guy at 18 looks like a grown man. That was something Nolan Patrick, coming to the NHL, looked like a grown man, at 18 years old. Denver Barkey looks like he's 13, right? Like you literally look at the guy, he looks so young. So he's going to take time. And the fact that they're already taking a look at him, because you got to realize the coaching staff wants to see these guys now. That's why these decisions are made. You don't see all of the young players in here, right? These are guys who have piqued the interest. And I think Denver Barkey is a very, very interesting player. And playing at center as an undersized, physically developed player with a lot of skill, that might be the steal of the draft for us in the end. And Tyson Forrester, we already know. So, while I wanted to see him in that top 6, it does tell me, and if you look at the rest of the lineup where you kind of see veterans like Couturier and Farabee and Frost and Atkinson, you see guys kind of penciled into that spot where they're probably going to be playing that role. And I think there is a good chance, and we've seen this already during training camp, that Tyson Forrester will be the third line right winger on this team. They have him there as maybe even more of that veteran presence on that third line. And I think that combination has enough to spark the ability to score. We'll see how the special teams are. I expect Forrester to be on the top power play, and maybe Barkey, maybe Brown will play on the second unit power play. But there are enough combinations here where the Flyers can still kind of throw out a good power play unit with Farabee, Couturier, Frost, Atkinson. That Forrester might get pushed down, but I would assume that Forrester is going to play top unit power play, and we'll go through the defense of who will play the power play there. And then penalty kill wise, I think that's kind of open. I think they're just going to rotate guys in there to see how they do. And maybe with the power play too, right? You really want to give everybody opportunity to see them. That's what these games are about. You don't want to get embarrassed, but the score is not the biggest thing. You don't care that much if these guys make a mistake. You care what Torts have been saying, how they respond to the mistakes. What's their mental makeup at the pro level? And then that fourth line, Tyson Fury, who actually looked pretty good at camp. I got to say, he looks like a full-grown man. I think he will be a very interesting player for the Phantoms. I don't expect much of him at the NHL level, at least not this year. But I do think he's a valuable AHL player, and the fact that he's relatively young is interesting, and I like it. And then the centering of Elliot Denoyer, we know, right? I don't think the Flyers want to put this guy at center on the fourth line. I think he's starting because he didn't have a great rookie game. He hasn't necessarily stuck out beyond anybody else in rookie camp. But this is another guy, expect him to get better as the season goes on. He is one of maybe the top call-up from the AHL, assuming Forrester makes the team. So this is a guy who they want to see, can we bring him up to play a heavily defensive role, which if somebody in that bottom 6 gets injured, he is most likely the top call-up there without Lazinski being part of that mix. And we'll see what happens with Lazinski. He's a guy who might have to go through waivers, might not make it even with the Flyers roster this year. And then Samu Tuamala. And, shout out to Charlie O'Connor about this. He was mentioning this in the training camp kind of press area. I think he brings up a good point that a guy like Samu Tuamala, if he thinks he's going to be a top 6 forward in the NHL, there's a good chance you're not going to be. But if you can prove to play more of a bottom 6 or even a middle 6 role, I think that's where he really lives. So putting him on that kind of fourth line and giving him an opportunity to play kind of that checking, hard-nosed game, he has some of that too. He's not, like, he was scrawny when he came here. Now he's got a little more size. He's got really good feet. He can skate. So I really like this fourth line, and they might actually be able to chip some goals in. So if you look at this lineup top and down, it's pretty well balanced. I think they will struggle at times in this game. They will rely heavily on Couturier and Frost and Atkinson and Farabee to kind of move the puck offensively, but that's okay. That's what we want to see, and we want to see them surprise us, right? We want to see how they do against NHL competition. I think Elliot Denoyer will get a lot of PK time in this game, as he should. And hopefully we see some interesting combinations where maybe he plays with Atkinson or Farabee, or maybe he plays with Couturier even in a kind of a stranger combination. So I'm looking forward to that. I think Barkey will get some of that as well. Okay, let's go into the defense. So on D, this is where, let's be honest, nobody knows what the defense is going to really look like for the Flyers right now. I made some guesses online. The closest thing I think is probably going to happen is I do expect York to play with Ristolainen as the season starts, but the top pairing today will be York and Sean Walker. Now, York looked really good at training camp. I'll talk more about that in our full podcast tomorrow that we record tomorrow after the game. We'll have more to review. But Cam York looked very good in those scrimmages. I have to say, I would be ready for Cam York being a different player than he was last year, and I would imagine the coaching staff has noticed. Not just defensively, offensively. He looks very confident right now. I'm a big fan of York. I don't like to say he's going to be a number one defenseman just because I haven't seen that yet, but if he continues to progress like this all the time, you never know. I still see him as a Brian Rafalski type, that supportive top pairing defenseman. But we don't even have a number one defenseman, so he kind of is that right now at this point, or at least him and Sanheim will be that combination, with Ristolainen playing that kind of physical support role, which he's pretty good at it. But Sean Walker will be an interesting one. This is a guy with tons of NHL experience. He's 28 years old. It's a kind of a small top pairing. Neither one of them are above 6 foot tall. So it'll be interesting to see how they do physically. But York is very strong for a guy his size, especially for his age. I think he'll get a lot stronger as he moves forward. And then Sean Walker is a guy who is feisty. He's got the ability to move the puck. He should be able to keep up with York. But I do believe there might be times where they get hemmed in their own zone. I think the defense is where the Flyers are going to struggle the most in this game. There's going to be a lot thrown at York. He will be probably playing power play, penalty kill, and I wouldn't be surprised if he leaves this game playing 25 plus minutes even, just in the scenario they're in. Second pairing, everybody knows Emil Andre. Everybody's excited about him. The coaching staff's excited about him. I'm still taking it with a grain of salt whether he actually makes the Flyers right out of camp, just because of the contract situations and the fact Sealer's there and Walker's there and Stahl is there. But he will either be making the Flyers bottom 6 and he'll be playing the bottom pairing, or he'll be playing the number one defenseman for the Phantoms. Again, Briere called him dominant. We have to be aware of that. And they're giving him and Grans, again, Helge Grans have a history of playing together all throughout. They're both Swedish. There's no language barrier. It makes a lot of sense there. And Grans has got the physical size and the skating, and he was a former second-round pick the same way that Emil Andre is. So this will also be interesting to see if they can handle a more NHL lineup and how they'll do. I suspect that Andre will. Grans is the one I still have a little more question mark about, but he is bigger, stronger. So I think together they might find themselves in a good, again, this is a big test for them. We really want to see this stuff. Then the last pairing, this is the most interesting one because Oliver Bonk is playing. Now, it's a very early for Bonk. Nobody expects him to be NHL ready at this point, but he is stable at every single thing he does. How he develops, I think, is a bit of a question mark. You know, I see a floor of a number 4 defenseman and a ceiling, a potential number 1 even. I don't see it right now. Like, I can't tell you I look at his game and see the offense and the defense, but I always talk about you're getting a player to mold. You're getting a player that will develop. Defensemen take 4 or 5 years to reach the NHL. I think Bonk will probably reach the NHL earlier, but he's not going to be even close to what he is for several more years. So you really want to see how his game evolves. Putting him with Sealer is a great idea. Sealer hustles, does all the little things well, will show up well in preseason. I almost have no doubt. He looked very good at training camp, to be honest with you. I expect him to be a starter this year on the team. But I think putting him with Bonk is a really good idea, and putting Bonk in that third pairing is going to be really interesting. Look out for him to potentially be playing on the power play a little bit. He'll definitely get penalty killing time today, in my opinion. I mean, all the defensemen will. And I think they'll rotate maybe a mix of York, Andre, maybe even give Bonk a little bit of power play time if they get it. I think primarily we'll see York and Andre carrying the power play, and then the penalty kill will be a mix. I don't think the Flyers are going to go with two defensemen on the power play, but we'll see. And then we'll go to the goaltenders. Pettersson, I'll be honest with you guys, he looked really good in training camp. Nobody should count anybody out. On here, we don't expect him. I'm not expecting any of these goaltenders, including Ersan, to be number one. I know what Carter Hart is. He's the number one goalie. You heard the GM say it itself, barring something that we don't know so far happening. He's the number one guy. But Pettersson, I would say the way he looked at training camp, there's a good chance he is the guy they have for the number two spot, unless they want to hold on to contracts, right? Ersan is safe, but Sandstrom has to go through waivers. So for some reason, Sandstrom and Pettersson are pretty even in their performance. But I'll say the fact that Pettersson's getting 2 periods and Sandstrom's getting 1, they haven't seen as much of Pettersson, but it tells me they're really taking it seriously. Again, he's older than all of the goalies we have. He has shown the ability to play in the NHL at a high level, at least for one season. And to see maybe he rebound, maybe he had injuries we weren't aware of, who knows. But I think it's a big year. And it's a big year for him. He's playing for a contract. He's playing to survive in the NHL, right? Because while he has 2 years left, he could be bought out next year. That's always a possibility if he does not continue what he's doing. And the Flyers have the safety net of moving him from the NHL to the AHL because nobody's going to grab a $5 million contract for a guy who can't make the NHL, right? So the Flyers will be giving him a long look, and I'm not surprised to get in 2 periods. So let's look forward to tonight's game. I have no predictions on how this will turn out. The Devils have one of the deepest prospect pools in the NHL, and they're a good team. At the lower levels, and they're a good team at the NHL level. So it will be a difficult test for this team. But led by Couturier and Atkinson, who are still very rusty, it's a good test to throw them in. I don't know if I expect them to win today, but I expect them to be competitive all the way through. And if they do win today, I would say it's a great sign, especially when it comes to Couturier and Atkinson. But I really want to see what these young kids can bring. They got a lot of growing still to do, but this is time. Now we're here, and I expect them to show up, and I expect that Tortorella will expect them to show up. And they're going to be expected to play very physical hockey. And I like that. I like that a lot. So enjoy the show tonight. We'll review it in the podcast. And remember, always stay great.